I've been a member of the Tommy Thompson Community Garden for about 20 years, give or take. I'm not sure how many, but it's been a long time. Tommy Thompson is an amazing place. We have about 3 acres of community garden. It's by far the largest community garden in the state. It's surrounded by fields, forests, and the Winooski River. I remember early on when I was gardening down there, if I stayed too long, Rena Calkins' cows would get ahead of me. They'd be meandering down the road, and I'd get behind them. And in a way, it was good because I slowed down, and after all, we all have to slow down. Yeah. You don't see the cows there anymore. But the barn, they were going down to where the Intervale Center is located. There was a barn nearby. So that's where they ended up, and eventually I went home. It was like meditation practice. Over the years, we've had many immigrants come and garden down at Tommy Thompson. It was generally because of the wars that were taking place all over the world. Aika Sarkisova from Eastern Europe came with her heirloom tomato seeds, which she gave to me, and I grew tomatoes, and then I gave tomato seeds to other folks who grew tomatoes. My family from Vietnam grew greens, and they grew lots of greens. And one time, they gave me some chrysanthemum greens. So I took them home and I put them in a salad, and boy, were they nasty tasting. So I went back the next day, and I spoke to my family, and they started chuckling. They said, "Ron, you got to steam them, and then you got to add herbs." So they said, "Come back the next day," and they steamed some up for me, and they put garlic and herbs, and they were delicious. Phoebe and Raimundo were from Managua, Nicaragua, which I had visited a number of times. And they brought with them peppers. And of course, they gave me the seeds, and I grew them. And then I gave other folks seeds, and they grew them. Now, Phoebe and Raimundo, one night in the middle of winter, they invited me over to their house in the old North End. They said they were going to have a barbecue. And I was thinking to myself, isn't it a little cold to be having a barbecue? Well, I went into their house, and next to the window with a fan, they had a barbecue. And it was a very interesting, I chuckled to myself, and I said, this is like being in Nicaragua, out in the countryside, where many people have poor homes and they don't have the kitchens. They use wood to cook on, and so there would be smoke in the kitchen. Phoebe and Raimundo worked at Costco, and they ran the bakery with their other friends. And I had never been to Costco, and they kept inviting me. And I said, well, okay. But they said, we'll meet you at the front door. So when I walked in, I was undergoing culture shock. What an irony. Here they were from Nicaragua. They came here. They worked in the bakery. And when I met them at the front door, they had to hold my hand. Eventually, Phoebe and Raimundo moved to Brownsville, Texas, where they ran the greenhouse for Costco. And now and then they come back and we visit with each other with no barbecues. There are many other folks I could talk about. Everything wasn't always beautiful down in the Intervale. At times, well, it was what I called the dark side. I remember meeting a guy who was wearing a backpack and he had some binoculars and he was, looking up at the birds. And I know a little bit about birds, not a lot. And so I would point to a bird and I would name it. And then I would point to another bird and I said, what kind of bird is that? And I kept pointing to birds and he didn't know the names of those birds. So I asked him to empty his backpack, and it was full of vegetables. Well, another time, there were two older ladies, sort of grandmothers, that were driving an old Volvo station wagon. And I noticed they kept driving into the gardens a lot. And I went over to speak to them, and I asked them if they were members of the community garden. And they said they weren't. And they said, well, isn't this a community garden? And I said, yeah, but you got to pay and you got to do the work. So that was the last time I saw the grandmothers. Sonny Martin was a homeless fellow, and he was a very nice gentleman. He was living at a residence for homeless people who had disabilities, and he loved being down in the Intervale. And Burlington Parks and Rec gave him a weed whacker, and eventually he got the name Sonny the Weed Whacker, because when someone didn't take care of their gardens, Sonny would whack them down. He also had a lawnmower. And he did this amazing, he kept Tommy Thompson looking park-like. He'd mow behind the sheds. He'd mow along the fence line. And sometimes he actually mowed people's gardens down. Well, he died a number of years ago, and he's sorely missed. It's interesting because he loved being down there so much that in late fall, after the gardens had been put to bed, you'd see Sonny with his car down there just hanging out because he loved being down there so much. So we really miss Sonny. I'm trying to remember the rest of what I'm supposed to say. I remember. I was a coordinator there for about 15 years. And every year we had, not every year, almost every year we had a potluck supper. And one year in particular, there were a large number of Bosnian families down there. And we had the potluck, and the food that the Bosnian families bought, it was so good. The hippie families brought carrot sticks and celery stalks. So, but anyway, what was amazing about that night is I had an epiphany. I said, let's stand in a circle, let's hold hands, and let's share what our country of origin, where your grandparents came from. And of course, there were no Native Americans among the group. So everyone came from different parts to the world. And it was amazing because you had this feeling that in a way we're all immigrants. And today is a very special day because Martin Luther King used to talk about this country as a nation of immigrants. And of course, you all know that it's been 50 years of his passing. Thank you.